Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Murchison, and I'm co-chair of the DC Leadership Committee of 2020 Women on Boards. On behalf of my two co-chairs, Jill Klein and Mandy Whedon, as well as my great friends on our steering committee, welcome. It remains an enormous privilege for me to help organize the women and some men of the Washington metro area as they and we advocate for more women on boards of companies. This is our 9th year of hosting this local event, while it is the 10th year of what started out as 2020 Women on Boards National, and now is 2020 Women on Boards Global. Our first year, we had just a handful of attendees. Today, there are more than 250 registered guests for this local virtual event. We've come a long way, and we've met our goal of 20% women on boards of companies in the Russell 3000, but there is much work to be done. We are seeing women shatter all kinds of glass ceilings, including our new Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris, the first Black, Indian, and Caribbean American woman to serve in the country's second highest office. A record 130 Black women were congressional candidates this election cycle, with 62 winning party nominations and appearing on ballots on Election Day. And in the sports world, just this past weekend, the Miami Marlins hired Kim Ng as their new general manager, making her the first female general manager in Major League Baseball history. And she is believed to be the first female general manager across all 4 major US sports. Things are happening, and the stage is set for women doing more and more. Shortly, Jill Klein will share important campaign information about women on boards in the DMV. Then Leslie Ireland, who returns a second time as our Conversation on Diversity moderator, will lead the discussion with our distinguished panelists about women leaders changing the world. Next, Mandy Whedon will speak with Stephanie Sonnabend, founder of 2020 Women on Boards, and then we'll go to breakout rooms led by our 15 director coaches who will share their unique stories and insights about board service and answer your questions. But before we get to all of that, let me take a moment to thank our sponsors. The Platinum, thank you, Amalgamated Bank, our Platinum sponsor. Thank you to our Silver sponsor, Capital One, 2U, and Houlihan Lokey. And thank you to all of our DC sponsors. Thank you to our global sponsors. And thank you to this group of amazing women who tirelessly worked to put together today's program. We are so grateful to you. Camille Alexander, Jane Scott Cantus, Molly Culhane, Janet Demas-Crilly, Jackie Jodel, Susan Holliday, Patty Froyo, Jenna Howard, Leslie Ireland, Ebony Lee, Jan Molino, Mindy McClure, Megan McLennan, Tamara Nall, Monica Parikh, Devin Perry, Deborah Storms, Nicole Streeter, and Wendy White. Thank you, ladies, for doing such a terrific job. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jill Klein, who is a dean and professor at American University. Jill?
Good afternoon, everyone. You know, 10 years ago, I just got to get the slides up here. Let's see, are they coming? 10 years ago, 2020 seemed so far away, but the numbers are telling us that we made that number. We in fact, in the largest companies, we're over 30%, but when you look at the Russell 3000, even the Russell 3000 has achieved the 20%. And so if we just kind of let this slide go all the way through, because I want to make sure you see the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland, you know, the really interesting challenge for us here is not at the top end, but it's in those small companies. It's the bottom 1,000 companies where they lag. And in fact, we remain at well under 20%, at 18%. And this is where we have got the greatest opportunity. So as we move ahead and we look at what's going on in our region, and we sort of look and compare, and we just want to forward the slide there, please. One of the things that I think is so exciting about our region in particular is that the state of Maryland has passed legislation that is really focusing on building gender diversity on boards. And they join the states of California and Illinois so that we can more deeply focus on this issue. And when you look at the winning companies in our region, we've got 7 DC companies that are winning companies. We've got 35 in Maryland, and we've got 51 in the state of Virginia. So what does that really tell us about our opportunities? Can we go to the next slide, please? Just imagine for a moment that all the remaining companies in Maryland went to 20%. We would need maybe somewhere between 26 and 31 new women. In DC, we just need to add 2 women to boards. And in Virginia, we need to add somewhere between 40 and 44 women. So whether the board chooses to add a seat or retire a man, that means somewhere just in our region, adding 68 to 75 women means that all of our companies could be at 20%. But let's think about that. Let's go to the next slide. Is 20% really good enough? Is it really what we want? And the answer is, I don't know about you, but 20% is not good enough. Next slide, please, because starting in 2021, 2020, women on boards will become 50-50 women on boards as we strive for gender parity. This is a bold goal, but we have always been a bold organization. Nationwide, there are only 163 companies with gender balanced boards out of almost 3,000. Just think about that, 163 out of 3,000 companies. And in our region alone, only 5% of all boards are gender balanced. So what does that mean? It means we have got our work to do. And that means we need a new vision. And here's our new vision. All public company boards will be gender balanced, with women holding half of corporate board seats. And that's all women, women who represent the diversity of our country and of our world. We are all in this together. And through 2020 Women on Boards, we will educate and we will collaborate. And wow, am I excited to be an ongoing part of this campaign. And so now, as we turn this over to what I know you all really came to hear, which is our very distinguished panel of speakers, let me first introduce the person who will lead our conversation. She is an accomplished board member. She is also someone who has served at the highest levels of our government, making sure that we protect the US economic and national security. Please join me in welcoming Leslie Ireland. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay, but technology may not be my forte. So thank you so much, Jill. And I am excited to be here today. And I know this is going to be an exciting conversation just based on the conversations we had with the panelists prepping for today. And you will learn a lot. And I am impressed by the wisdom that I have heard and the things that I have learned from them as well. So on the panel today, we have Kim Cassiano, an independent director, and she is with Ford Motor Company. Rosie Allen Herring is joining us, President and CEO of United Way. She's also on the board of MedStar Health. We have Lynn Fox, International President of Workers United. She is a member of the Amalgamated Bank Board. And Jorge Benitez, he's the former CEO of Accenture, and he is with Fifth Third Bancorp, amongst other boards. So with that, I'd like to welcome my panelists to come to the table. That looks like we are all here. Wonderful, wonderful. So to all of you out there, thank you for joining us today. I know you're going to learn a lot, and I know there are breakout sessions to follow us, and I think those are going to be especially helpful as well. And today we're going to be talking about diversity and women on boards and what that means. And as I walked into this panel, I thought a lot about what's going on in the world today, and our nation, in fact, almost the entire world is engaged in a dialogue about social justice, diversity and equity. And for our panelists we have here today, this struggle represents nothing new. But I think for me, the question was, and I put this to the panelists, what do we do to make this time different? And how can we help affect systemic change through our service on boards and in other areas of our life? And Rosie, I want to start with you and ask you to take the first question.
Sure. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you to all of the 2020 Women on Boards for this great opportunity. And thanks to everyone who has joined us today. This is going to be, I know, a great conversation. So as I think about what you've shared, Leslie, in terms of where we are indeed engaged in significant dialogue around social justice, racial justice, equity issues, and the like. I think that really what we find ourselves, especially with the pandemic, the health pandemic, as well as the pandemic of social injustice, there is no segment of society that's been untouched by this crisis that we find ourselves in. So this is not a crisis of the moment for a particular population that you can either say, oh, wow, that feels sad, and we will do what we can to support them. We all find ourselves in the midst of this crisis. And so I think we find ourselves really as part of the solution in what we can do. And as women on boards, and certainly men too, with our good friend Jorge, it really is about how we can lead our companies to think differently and much more comprehensively about where equity issues lie within the business model and the strategic priorities for an organization. I think that the issues that are here have been here for quite some time. They're not new, as you said. They've simply been exacerbated because of where we find ourselves at this moment as a country. So it's not something I think we can walk away from this time. I don't think that we're going to go back to quote unquote normal. I think we have to look forward to a better normal.
I agree with you. And I'd like to turn to Kim. You brought up some really interesting points about just the history of efforts to challenge equality.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. And hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. And thank you to 2020 Women on Boards, soon to be 50-50 Women on Boards. That's exciting. Women were the first ones to really challenge equality and social justice. If you think of it, we started fighting more than 100 years ago. And then about 40 years ago, something happened that I'm going to tell a quick anecdote. In 1975, the United Nations proclaimed that 1977 would be the International Year of the Woman. First time they had ever done so, first time they had ever heightened the radar, the exposition of women. And the United Nations asked that each country take steps to commemorate this. At that time, our president, President Gerald Ford, formed a 35-member Women's Commission to take 2 years to plan the observance of International Women's Year. And that commission included women like Katharine Hepburn, Betty Friedan, Maya Angelou, Gloria Steinem, Anne Armstrong, who at that time had, some of you may remember, was the first female US ambassador to a major world power, England. And that commission also included my mom, who 50 years ago was the first Hispanic to serve on the board of Girl Scouts and the founder of the Hispanic chapter of the League of Women Voters. So this group, these 35 women, organized a conference that took place in 1977 in Houston, and thousands of women attended, every living first lady. It was also attended by Coretta Scott King. It was there was no power to do anything, no power to change policy, but the important thing was that equality and issues of social justice were being discussed. And all these steps, all these little seeds that have been planted throughout these past decades have been essential to get us to where we're getting today. And there are certain lessons that came out of that gathering so many years ago that are still applicable today. One of those lessons is the concept of critical mass. And critical mass on boards is something that is essential. They don't start studying the business case of women on boards until there's a critical mass, meaning 3 or more women on boards. So I think that's especially important. Also important is just the idea of dialogue and coming together. Something I've been noticing, I've been serving now for 17 years on public company boards, and something I've noticed that is making all the difference is when I hear my male colleagues talk about in frustration how their daughters have reached some glass ceiling. And nobody has ever done a study on that. Nobody has ever looked at the personal experiences of male directors, the fact that many male directors have sons or daughters or nieces or nephews who have married people from other ethnic backgrounds, and they proudly talk about it. Nobody is studying, but there's no amount of conferences like this that can be as effective as somebody saying, boy, I'm frustrated that my daughter didn't get ahead because she was a woman. So I think that that's another important thing we should all keep in mind. And those board dinners and those get-togethers between colleagues are a great informal atmosphere to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And I like the point you make, Kim, that it's not just women that need to be focusing on this, it's the men in the room. It's the men in our lives. And I know I've certainly been helped along the way, but that's something I think we can take a page from your comments and focus on that in our own boardrooms. And Lynn, I don't want to get you in here because I know you bring in a different perspective, being international president of Workers United, and how has this pandemic, how have you seen it impacting the labor portion of our workforce?
Well, first of all, let me say hi to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and given the opportunity to share today. And, this is a very special organization. And I'm so proud of the work you do, but you definitely should be proud of the work you do. And 50-50 is okay with me. So just want to put that out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, I think we have to take this moment and acknowledge that the issue of board diversity is just one piece of the overall goal we should have to make sure that our corporate social responsibility and equality is more than just talk. I think it's one piece to the puzzle that we have. And in addition to being International President of Workers United, I'm also in the role of chair at Amalgamated Bank. And I have that chair knowing that less than 5% of women occupy that seat. Just let that sink in for a minute. I mean, it's really hard to comprehend that. So it's important to me, both personally and institutionally, that we live out our values every day and support other corporations as they try to do that. And hopefully they do try to do that. The labor aspect of it, I think, educated me on the struggles that people have every day, most of which never makes the headlines. But it has embedded in me a desire to acknowledge that on behalf of other people and to start it in the corporate boardroom and really have it affect the lives of the people that we represent in the communities that we serve. And having more women, especially women of color, in the boardroom directly relates to stronger corporate performance. And as you know, I grew up in the labor movement, but whether it's banking or the labor movement, women have been slow to be given leadership opportunities. And that's why this political and social moment is so important and so crucial. And as my other speakers have acknowledged, these issues have been around for a long time, but somehow a perfect storm has connected us between the health pandemic and the social pandemic. And people are finally starting to realize that there is a connection between how we run our organizations and how society functions. But we don't solve diversity for diversity's sake or check a box or 30%. That's not going to solve the problem. That's empty. We have to do it more to coordinate an equitable solution overall for the lives that we live. And that's one way to get there, but I think we have to acknowledge that's a step to get there. It's not the end result. And we also need to acknowledge our non-financial stakeholders as much as we acknowledge our financial stakeholders. Because if we're going to combat climate change and economic disparity and structural racism, then we need companies who are firing on all cylinders and who really get the global picture here and are responsible to the whole. So, how do we get there? Well, we have to have clear goals, and we have to have new policies, and we have to have new programs. And that starts at the top with a board's own diversity and culture. But everyone in the organization has a role to play. Those responsibilities can't be delegated. And we as leaders need to hold ourselves responsible and those who report to us accountable as well. At Amalgamated, we think we do a really good job. We try to live our values, but there's always room for improvement. And that means true introspection and constant self-assessment. And in plain terms, that means pay equity reviews, cultural reviews, infrastructure and processes evaluations. We serve thousands of unions and nonprofits and foundations, political candidates and campaigns, and human needs organizations who are fighting for gender and racial justice every day. So we support their financial strength so they can invest more time and money into the movement for a more just and equitable world. We grew our assets from 4 to 6 billion over the last years to enable us to do more of that. But the most important thing we can do along the way is to be supportive and do for those following us what others have done for us. Let's make it better and easier for the next generation. There's no playbook that says it has to be difficult. The solutions are not complicated.
Great, thank you. And Lynn, I just want to foot stomp what you said about it's not diversity for diversity's sake. The value is that we all come to a board or to a situation in our lives with a different lens, and that lens is shaped by our life experiences, by our gender, by our ethnicity, our race. And those are all very valuable facets to that lens. How can we use that lens to lead us through a crisis? And how have you as panelists seen this play out during the pandemic or other challenging situations that you've been through? And I want to ask Jorge to take the first answer because it's something very interesting he shared during our prep session.
Thank you, Leslie. And first of all, let me thank 2020 Women on Boards and also add how delighted I am to be on this panel with you and other amazing women leaders. This is a real privilege for me. And like all of us, right, I have faced difficult challenges and dealing with my boards on the pandemic issues and all of that. But what I'd like to do in answering your question is really share the experiences that I saw with my daughter, Katerina, as she managed through this situation, right? My daughter is a teacher. She's a single mom. She has a 7-year-old little girl who's can make me do anything, and also a 2-year-old son who is redefining what it means to be in the terrible twos, right? She's also got a history of bronchitis and pulmonary respiratory issues that make her high risk. So you can imagine the difficult times that she had as a teacher and as a mother trying to sort of deal with this pandemic. But I got to tell you, though, in typical Katie fashion, she worked through the situation and made the best of it. Let me just share a couple of things that really highlight what she did. She developed a network with other teachers that were having to do home daycare and at the same time also teach, which was not something she had been prepared for doing before, and learned a lot from others about how they were doing, and then shared those best practices with others who needed that help as well. She became an expert in COVID and actually had me tested a number of times to make sure that I wasn't going to either, hurt them or somehow do something that all of us would regret. She also enlisted her mom and I during the difficult days where she had to be online teaching and also had to supervise the kids at the exact same time. And she made curbside pickup a normal occurrence and actually figured out a way to have the kids wave to the people that would deliver things to the car, right? I mean, those kinds of things I'm sure everyone's done, but she figured out how to deal with this. And in essence, she faced a tough situation. And while she had her ups and downs like all of us, she made the best of it. She adapted, right? Which is, I think, the best way to describe what we're all trying to do through this pandemic is figure out that whenever we face a crisis, we reach out to others for help and then adapt and figure out how to make the best of it. So she's my role model in the pandemic world, and I'm very proud of her. I thought I would share that with you.
Thank you. That's really, I just think that's wonderful and to the point of everyone's got a lens and you took the opportunity to use that lens and just what you could see from what your daughter was doing. So Rosie, can I get you to share some of what you saw happening at the United Way?
Sure. Similar to Jorge, I think we all find ourselves at a place where we need to sort of kind of meet the challenge wherever it falls for us. And at your United Way here in the Washington, D.C. area, we were going through, as many of us, we've been working remotely since March. And every Friday we have all hands meetings. And at first it was really about check-ins, if you will, to see how everyone was doing, making certain they're staying safe, not losing the work. And we had two segments of our United Way population that had different perspectives, if you will. At first, for many of our millennial colleagues, it was exciting. They were like, this is great. I can do this forever. We had, virtual happy hours. We were doing virtual yoga, you name it, they were doing it. We can do this forever, so they thought. Until around May or so, the Friday meetings became a little bit of a drag. It was, oh my gosh, I need human interaction. I'm in a small apartment in DC and the walls are closing in. I need a real drink at a real bar. And so what we were able to say is the work that we do is helping those who need us the most. While you may have been inconvenienced, many people's lives have been upended. And then, of course, on the heels of the George Floyd incident, we were doing our check-ins and everyone was generally okay for that particular Friday until one of our colleagues, who happens to be one of our IT guys, says, as an African-American male, I'm not okay. And it stopped us all in our tracks. And what had been somewhat perfunctory, if you will, customary, because we were all safe, none of our families had been impacted, but him saying that at that moment he was not okay it led other colleagues to say that they weren't okay. And then we immediately stopped the meeting and said, okay, now we got to have a conversation. And so what it led us to is all throughout the crisis, as a CEO, I had been asked my opinion, asked to do op-eds, asked to do interviews and the like, to talk about the crisis and how we were trying to meet it. But at that moment, because those gentlemen chose to share, and we had 5 African-American males who told us how they felt. We said the next voice that they hear from United Way would be from our African-American male colleagues. And so they did a joint op-ed, and then they each individually did op-eds. And these are colleagues who are accountants, colleagues who are head of all of our impact work, colleagues who are in IT and doing other programmatic work. So having them have their voice not only be counted, valued, and shared, it opened it up for so many of our other partners, corporate and otherwise, to say, United Way, I'm going to meet you at this moment as well. And so it just behooves us to not think always externally, but also to think internally as well.
Yeah. You know, Rosie, what I see in what you just shared is, number one, there's an environment there at United Way where someone can feel vulnerable, that someone can share something. And it's got to be difficult in the face of everything that's going on to allow yourself to lay that bare. And so I applaud that, but I also applaud people for listening and for hearing. I think listening and hearing are going to be equally critical going forward, especially as we're asking people to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate what you did there. You know, I wanted to talk about the issue of this pandemic, and it really is unusual, and then it brought everything to a standstill. It impacted all cross-section of society. And, you know, we talk a lot about work from home. There are people that could not work from home and had to be basically on the front line, whether you are in an essential work area or you're part of the medical profession. And so I'd like to turn this first to Lynn and find out what did you see with workers that had to stay in place and the challenges they faced, and as a board, what you had to think about in terms of protecting them.
Well, that did become our first challenge. You know, I wear 2 hats. So I'm responsible for the lives of 80,000 workers in the US and Canada who, I would say 50% were in the service sector and 50% were in essential work. So, and then we have the bank where we were able to go remotely. So there were 2 different sets of issues really that had to be confronted and dealt with and handled in completely separate ways. Good thing that crisis is not a new experience for those of us in the labor movement. People have always been challenged to lead fair and sustainable lives. It's a constant struggle. And our members' lives are fairly regularly in crisis. You know, I don't know if you've seen the studies, but the average working family in this country, believe it or not, doesn't have $400 for an emergency. So, you know, I think someone said you have to meet people where they are. You can have solutions that are not attainable for people because then it just won't be a solution for them. But as compassionate people, you know, we have to see struggles through the eyes of those who are going through that struggle and see how it affects them. And so in this instance, wherever it was, we had to recognize our employees' challenges. And first, we felt that the pandemic affected everyone the same. And then we realized that now we see it disproportionately affected women, and particularly women of color. It's forced employees to work from home and manage their work and family from home. And then add to that the childcare that, you know, we had before been able to delegate or deal with, but now everything was all in one place. And that made it difficult for people who had to go to work and then potentially would bringing in COVID into their homes and all the protocols they had for that. And then you had remote workers who just are suffering major burnout because there's only so much you can humanly do. I mean, that's, that's a given. And then we encountered the problem with employers who weren't responsible employers and weren't keeping their workplaces safe for the workers who had to go in and do the work, whether it was a laundry worker doing hospital laundry, or, a distribution worker who had to supply e-commerce, because as we all know, e-commerce took the place of shopping in stores. And so our workers were more busy than ever, not less busy. So we had companies who did everything right and put their workers first. And then we had companies who were the complete opposite. And then we had employers who were everywhere in between. And unfortunately, the Department of Labor was a little MIA here, and OSHA was MIA. And it kind of was the wild, wild west. We had to figure it out. We hired health and safety experts to help us get through it. We had weekly calls. That's all on the union side. And on the bank side, we had to figure out, how to accommodate schedules and how to push over vacation days and how to protect against Zoom burnout. I mean, look, I'm a mother of 3. I know what it is to juggle, but this gave a whole new meaning to juggling. But what I have discovered is this, that there is no substitute for transparency and open dialogue, and that we need to support women and help them balance caregiving duties, whether it's children or parents. I've been in both of those roles, and they have to know that their well-being is our well-being. You will not get the best from people if you don't give them your best. And no one has all the answers, but the answers do come if you figure it out together.
Excellent. Excellent. As we were waiting to come online, Kim brought up some encouraging news about vaccine availability, particularly for the frontline workers that are really out there helping with taking care of us and healing the sick. And, Rosie, can I get you to give some thoughts on what you saw with medical workers through MedStar Health and what this meant and how your board looked at that?
I will tell you, Leslie, it's been something that's been at the forefront of my mind as the vice chair of MedStar Health for, since the beginning of the pandemic, even before we knew it was the crisis that it is today. With 30,000 associates, you go in these waves, if you will. And the initial phase, of course, was all about helping those who needed us, those who came in, those who were ill. But as, of course, the crisis ensued, it became, how do we care for the 30,000 associates who were going through burnout, doing multiple shifts, and everything down to just even getting a meal because many of the cafeterias were closed, so on and so forth. Talking about the environmental staff. Lynn talks about, who she represents. And that is one of the core groups. And one of the things that I've said in one of our board members, the environmental and sanitation team is more important than the physicians, because they ensure that every surface of that hospital is clean enough and free from COVID in order for the doctors to be able to do the care that they need to do. And so what the board did at that time was really just, and has since then, has been able to try to implement things to support the staff themselves, the various associates, especially those that are on the front line, to say not only we care for you, that we recognize that many of them have other family members. They, again, are at risk every single day. Some of them not going home and staying at the hospital in order to keep their families safe. So part of it is just acknowledging the sacrifice that so many in our frontline responders, do, but it's also just recognizing that it's more than the medical professionals themselves. Hospitals are 365, days a year, 24 hours a day, and it takes all of the people to make it work. And so I will say that it's been a huge focus on not only the well-being of the patients that we care for, but also the well-being of the associates. And I will tell you, the latter part of this is we just have to recognize that mental health has become probably the largest effort for us in the latter part of this crisis, because it is very real. And trauma-informed care is something that is needed no matter where you are on the spectrum. So the focus has gone from, of course, the acute care that's needed at the moment to save someone's life, to now, dealing with a phase of caring for the associates who offer that care, to now dealing with the trauma-informed needs that are there across the spectrum for everyone. So the board has instituted a lot of different ideas and initiatives that help us to ensure that we try to maintain that balance. It's never 100% and certainly not perfect, but it's the effort that we put forth to try to keep the journey going.
Yeah, that's so important, Rosie. Part of what this pandemic has made me feel like is during my time in government, and I worked in government through a couple of wars in Iraq, and it always felt like we were sprinting a marathon.
Yes.
And we have to be careful that we are not asking our employees to sprint a marathon, because this pandemic will end. There will be vaccinations. We will come back to work, and then we've got to worry about the staff that comes back to work and how we continue to function and grow as a country. So want to shift a bit here, because this certainly has meant a lot of changes for everybody. But I'm curious to see what kind of changes you all have seen in your industries in the last year. And I'm not just talking technical changes, but how about hiring, communication, culture, especially in a work from home environment? And so, Jorge, can I turn to you and ask you to take a look at this?
Sure. And again, work from home is not necessarily new, but what the pandemic did is it magnified it and increased it virtually overnight, right? And it was a great ability to get things done. But as I think you mentioned, over time, I think we're going to have to figure out a way how we adapt work from home and deal with the cultural and other aspects of how people interact with their companies, right? And I really think that what I've seen in a couple of the boards is they're beginning to think about work from home as one element of a broader talent management strategy, which is really trying to address how do we build the engagement with our employees and our workforce, and how do we figure out a way that we are more meaningfully trying to help them do the things they need to do. I've seen a work from home strategy at one of the boards that's actually taking a look at, we may hire people online, but what we're going to do is figure out a way to bring them into the office while practicing social distancing and figuring out mechanisms that they get to meet with other people and understand the culture and the values and figure out the do's and don'ts that you wouldn't get by just being on a video call, right? Setting up buddy systems with other people that are coming online and folks that have been in the company. Those are not new tools or techniques, have been around for a while, but you've got to figure out a way to connect in ways that make it more appropriate for the individual at that point in time. And really also making sure that people have coaches and mentors and sponsors, just like we do today, but that are much more sensitive to the situation of working from home, particularly with working mothers and dealing with childcare and other issues like that. So I do think that in both organizations that I have the privilege of serving, there's been a greater awareness that this is the time for leadership to be present and to really try to figure out how we have a better connection and help people where they need to, and make changes that we wouldn't have otherwise thought about unless we were in a pandemic situation. So I'm actually very proud of the responses that I've seen, and I think there's lots of really great examples out there.
I agree, and I appreciate the ones that you shared, because you hear talk in the news about some companies are saying, if you want to work from home, this is the way it's going to be for the future. So I think being flexible and coming up with alternative solutions is important. And Kim, I wanted to shift to you, because you, through your position on Ford, the Ford corporate board, you talked in our prep sessions about the changing customer behavior is forcing some innovation in what you've seen. You're on mute. That's okay.
There was somebody next door that was mowing a lawn or something, so I put myself on mute so that I would respect everybody else and let them be well heard. Part of working at home.
Yeah.
Ford has had the benefit of getting a few months lead time, because we're a global company and we have 8 manufacturing facilities in China, and we have many customers in China. We had the benefit of seeing what happened in China months before the pandemic arrived to the US shores. And that was fantastic from the point of view of learning, not just from the point of view of learning about customers, but also, frankly, from the point of view of learning back to work protocols and steps that could be taken. And I'll just quickly touch upon that before I move into customers. Little things such as we all know how important it is in a pandemic to wash our hands, but who says that wash basins can only be located in restrooms? So we now have portable wash basins all over our factories, all over the world. So literally you don't need to go to the restroom to wash your hands, something as simple as that. Bracelets that our workers wear that buzz if they come within 6 feet of somebody else. So it's a gentle reminder for them to keep social distance. So those were the sort of things that we were able to look at, and something that Lynn will understand very well. You know, it's not just creating an environment that's safe for your workers, but making sure that they feel safe, that they believe that they're safe, and coming, you know, we have a whole protocol of how to enter a factory, how to leave a factory, how to park, how to even changing rooms for if you want to change your clothing before going home to your family, all these things. From a consumer point of view, one of the things that surprised us was how quickly the Chinese consumer moved to e-commerce. And we were selling cars online, delivering them to people's homes, and they weren't setting foot in the dealerships. And that was very interesting. And we were, of course, questioning whether that would be transferable to other markets, and only time would tell. But at least it gave us a head start in making sure that we were ramped up and in the mindset that we needed to be. And in the US, as we all know, it's been inconsistent from state to state and region to region, how selling of cars has been. But dealers are considered an essential business, because you have to remember that the front of the business sells cars, but the back of the business repairs police cars, repairs ambulances, repairs the delivery trucks for supermarkets. So that's an essential function. We also at Ford, you know, learned a lot of things about how to just quickly move. And I guess we may or may not have time to get into that, Leslie. I don't know if you want me to mention, but at Ford, the White House hadn't even touched base at Ford, and we were already planning how we would make ventilators and face shields. And we had not received a call from the White House. And it was amazing that our entire board was pushing management, and management had an incredible initiative to see what they could do and to do it. And nobody was talking numbers. Nobody was talking, what will this cost? Will we make money on this? It was absolutely, you know, we made iron lungs when tuberculosis broke out in America. We made airplanes when World War II broke out. Well, now we make ventilators. And this is just the way the Ford culture is.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's, having spent a lot of time in government myself, it's easy to think there's government and there's private sector. But a very significant portion of our private sector is part of our national security. To your point, what Ford has done, what other companies have done to move in with the pandemic and bring their skills and their expertise to bear to solve a problem that frankly was national, if not global. But you bring up an excellent point, Kim, about the issue of Washington, and we've got a Washington audience here. And so I wanted to shift to our panelists and ask about the relationship with Washington and how they saw that play out here during the pandemic. And during our discussion session, Jorge, you brought up some interesting points about regulators.
So let me let me share that I've actually seen examples of where regulators, and for that matter, other business partners or individual companies that our boards are dealing with, do some things that are not typical, right? In making accommodations in terms of restructuring exams or deferring some of the activities to ensure that management, particularly right after the pandemic really hit and we were so severely impacted. And so I take great comfort in the fact that when they did that, they recognized that management needed some time to prioritize some very, very critical issues. And so the accommodations that they made were frankly very appropriate. And it frankly has improved the relationship. It was already good, but it's improved the relationship, recognizing that these were difficult times and we needed to come together. I've also seen a similar thing with the business partners at another board that doesn't have the regulatory component, right? Where they got very significant, restructuring of financial terms for some of their contracts as a result of the pandemic. And again, that goes to the nature of the relationships that we all need to be able to sort of figure out how we work. And so I think there are lots of examples like that, Leslie. It's unfortunate that we don't hear more, but I think they're there and they're real.
That's a great point, Jorge, because in fact, it's easy to sometimes see those relationships as adversarial, but in fact, we were all pulling together and we all had a common goal in mind when this pandemic hit. Lynn, could you speak to some of the experiences you had with Workers United and the kind of what you were looking for from the government? And you are muted.
Got it. Well, as I said before, our biggest problems in returning to work were the lack of any guidance or enforcement or any compliance at all from OSHA and the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has the ability to enact emergency standards. They did not do that. And our workers were really at the mercy of the resources and desire, I would say, of their employer to make a safe environment for them. And I know that, it was a big headline story that people didn't want to return to work because of the furlough and the extra money on the furlough. So it was more disadvantageous to go back to work. That's not true. People want to work. They want their lives back. They were afraid. They were afraid because it wasn't safe, or they were afraid they didn't want to bring something back into their homes. And I would say because there was no message from the top of this country, that hurt the return to work, that hurt stability, that hurt workers. And it kind of depended on your geography almost. Where you were was how your company responded. Or what political party your governor was affiliated with, which is really a sad statement. But, I've always thought that government is not going to solve our equity and racism and gender problems. I mean, we've had years to do it and it hasn't happened. And I also don't think we can count on, some corporations self-regulating, especially when they think putting one woman on a board is the answer. And, that solves the problems. It doesn't convince me about change coming. But I do think that more and more corporations are starting to get the picture. And as the world shrinks and as one action, dominoes into another action or reaction, it can't be avoided. And, look, and the good thing that came out of the pandemic was, we were able to help a lot of our customers who otherwise didn't have access with our relationships, because we're not an SBA lender. But many of our customers who are minority owned or nonprofit or women owned businesses got what they needed. But I think the biggest lesson we need to take away from all of this is something Churchill said. And, you and I have discussed that before. And typical Churchill was very sarcastic, but so true, which is never let a good crisis go to waste. And so if we don't figure out solutions if we don't learn anything coming out of this and we don't put that knowledge into practice, then what was it all for? So we're coming up with solutions on our own. We're all figuring it out. We're figuring out what human needs organizations need to do, what our various stakeholders need to do, how to operate a company and still balance health and safety for your workers. So let's use those things we've learned going forward, because otherwise none of it makes any sense.
Absolutely. I want to close by asking each of you to reflect on something that Melinda Gates said during the global session for Women on Boards, formerly 2020, now 50-50. And she was concerned that this pandemic actually has threatened some of the gains that have been made by women and diverse populations. What, if you could think of one thing, what would you think of to help make sure that we don't see a reverse in that trend? Kim, I'll ask you to start.
Well, we as women, some of us mothers, some of us aunts, women in a position where we can influence the lives of young people, we have the power to create the next generation of chauvinists or not. And I don't think we should underestimate that. I mean, we are, yes, we can blame a lot of policy on this, but we as women and the women who came before us are largely to blame for the position that women are in. We are the ones who raise those boys to become chauvinist men, and we should, by our example, by the example of our marriages, we should have taught them differently. And that is something that no pandemic can affect. I think that all this time at home during COVID should be a time that women can take advantage of building bonds with their children and talking about some of their personal experiences. My children are well aware of my struggles in one of the first classes of women at Princeton, my struggles going into Harvard Business School in the 1970s, where you can imagine how few women and Latina women there were. I was, the first Latina on a Fortune 10 board of directors. I know what it is to be told to my face every day how lucky I am that affirmative action exists. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in a certain college. And it's up to us to talk to our sons and daughters and tell them about the struggles, tell them about respect for the opposite gender, talk to them about from the heart, talk from the heart, because we as mothers and aunts have the power to make a difference regardless of what's going on in the outside world.
Amen. Rosie, can I turn to you?
I don't know about after that fire, but in that same vein, and also to what Lynn shared about never, we should exploit every crisis. And I will tell you, as an African American, and certainly as a female, I find myself looking at both crises. The systemic racism crisis that we find ourselves in, it's a pandemic as well, just like the health one. I think that we cannot leave this crisis without bringing others to the table with us. And I think that when in the roles that we have in corporate boards, we have to sound the alarm, but not be alarmist. We have to bring solutions to the table with accountability. We have to ask for what we want right now, while there is at least a propensity to listen. And when we find ourselves in roles of authority where we can affect that change, it literally is about bringing others with us. Take that resume of another sister with you to that table and say, I'm willing to pound my fist on the table to say that this is a credible professional who can help us be better. And make the case, not ask nicely, but make the case as to why diversity on boards, and certainly having a woman's perspective on the board, is going to help that company be much more successful. It's not a nice to have. it's a have to have. And so I believe in the accountability. I believe that words matter. It's all about calling out the behavior and holding ourselves and others accountable.
I'll give a second amen. Okay, Lynn, to you.
Well, I guess I would answer that by saying, we as leaders have a certain amount of power, and with power comes great responsibility. And everything I do and have done, and the way I was taught, is to view our actions now as having repercussions for the next generation. And so if you think about everything we do, we're just passing through. We're just sort of keepers of the flame for the next gen. So before you take an action, if you think about what it's going to mean to those who come after you, then either you keep on that path or you change that path, because legacy for me is the most important thing.
I have a feeling you are leaving a very strong legacy, Lynn. Welcome. Jorge, bring it home.
Thank you, Leslie. And I'm inspired by all the comments so far, right? And I think I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, right? Which is advocating, championing, and sponsoring the minorities in the lives that I've seen. I mean, I think well, obviously not a woman, I can understand how women have felt, because I have felt that way in the past as a Cuban American and political refugee that came to this country at the age of 10. I understand what it's like to not have the fairness that we all have been doing, right? Which is to not only instill that in my children and my grandchildren, but also on the boards that I'm on, and continue to champion the cause that I know. And it's not, as I think Lynn said it best, it's not because we want to tick boxes. It's because we develop better solutions when we take multiple perspectives, ideas, and experiences. And I'm convinced of that, right? And so I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing.
Excellent. So I am really thankful this is recorded. I want to go back and listen to this myself. I know there's a lot of wisdom that I probably lost as I was thinking about my next question. But I wanted to thank all of the panelists and just clearly sharing from experience, sharing from their heart. And I don't think we could ask for anything more in this current environment. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mandy.
Thank you, Leslie. Wow, that was an awesome panel discussion. We are grateful to Leslie, Lynn, Jorge, Rosie, and Kim for sharing their perspectives with us as we continue our work to increase diversity in the boardroom. As we wrap up the webinar portion, we will move next after this to breakout rooms where there'll be small group discussions where you can unpack this discussion and discuss your board journey with director coach leaders. Before we do that, we are fortunate to have Stephanie Sonnabend, co-founder and chair of 2020 Women on Boards, join us today. Stephanie, along with her co-founder Molly Jarrell, founded 2020 Women on Boards 10 years ago with the goal of advocating, educating, and collaborating to achieve gender diversity in the boardroom. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome.
Hi, Mandy.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your leadership. I have two questions for you. The first is, what has surprised you in the last 10 years of your work with 2020 Women on Boards?
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks for having me involved with this. The panel was amazing. What great comments. So I just want to shout out to you and all the organizers who put such a great program together. It's been a great journey, really a 10-year journey. And what's been most amazing to me is how our message has really resonated with people. First, all over the country, and then increasingly all over the world. And we've been able to create a brand, if you will, that stands for diversity of women on boards. And so I've met amazing women along the way, and it vastly exceeded my expectations.
Excellent. So my second and last question for you is, What do we have to look forward to? What are you expecting in the next 10 years?
Shifting from 2020 Women on Boards, which is somewhat similar to a quota system, is a goal of a quota system, to 50-50 women on boards is a total shift in mindset. It really means that we're not looking to have just representation on the board. We're looking to have equal say on the board. And this is for all women. And we also are enthusiastic and do believe that as we move towards gender balanced boards, that will also create opportunities for diverse boards, so that it won't only be gender, but people of color as well, especially women of color. And so that whole shift mindset as we continue to expand globally, where the momentum is beginning, and I just want to see us continue to move forward with our message about how valuable it is to have diverse boards.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, there it is. That's our call to action. Build a balanced board. Last year at our 2020 Women on Boards event for DC, our call to action was help each other, be an ally, and seek allies. So today, our call to action is, we ask all of you to be purposeful in your work of building a balanced board. Bring in women, all women, including women of color, as Stephanie noted, to your boardroom. I look forward to hearing from each and every one of you next year about the work you've done to build a balanced board. Thank you, Stephanie. We'll see you in a breakout room.
Thanks, Bandy.
So as we prepare to leave our virtual ballroom and walk down the hall to our small group discussions in the breakout sessions, before we leave, I want to take an opportunity to say thank you one more time. Thank you to everyone who made this happen, behind the scenes and on the screen. Thank you to our stellar panel. Thank you to our accomplished and hardworking DC Leadership Committee. Thank you to our sponsors for their support. Thank you to all of you for joining in on this conversation and for the work that you do and that you will be doing to build a balanced board. So to join the breakout session, to go to the next segment in the calendar invitation you received, click the second link for the Zoom breakout room. I look forward to seeing you there in your breakout room, where we'll discuss many things, takeaways from this panel, and I'll share how I'm going to work to build a balanced board. See you in the boardroom.